In this video, we're going to start looking at how scripting is organized in Unity. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new script. Right, so I'm going to go into my scripts folder and I'll right click, I go to create, and I can click on a C# script. And I'm going to call it player controller. Player controller. And that's because this player controller script is going to control how my player moves and things like that. So that's the first thing we're going to learn how to script. So after you've created a script, you need to attach it to a object. So I'll click on my idle object, and there's a few ways I can do it. I can just click here and drag it up to idle, or I can drag it down here to my inspector, or I can click on add component and then look for, oh look, it says right there, the player controller script. Right, and it adds the script as a component down here in the inspector. Now that I have my player controller script, I'm going to double click on it to open it up, and it saves the scripts with a .cs extension. Right, so when I typed in player controller, it gets actually saved in the folder structure as player controller.cs. Now, it's opened up for me in Visual Studio because I have Visual Studio installed. If you don't have Visual Studio installed, I highly recommend that you download it. The community edition is free. Otherwise, Unity does come installed with an editor called MonoDevelop that's built in. However, it's not as robust or doesn't have as many features as Visual Studio does. Right, so to show you where you can change it, if you do download it, you click on Edit, and then it's in Preferences, External Tools, and this first one here, External Script Editor. Okay. Now I'm going to open up my script, and this is what the script looks like by default. So Unity uses a programming language called C#, and C# is very similar to a lot of the C-based languages. So if you're comfortable with JavaScript or something like that, there's still a bit of syntax you have to learn, but most of the basics will be very similar. Now, by default, whenever you open up the script, Unity creates a class in here. So this is how you create something called a class, and we'll go into what that means, with the exact same name as the script. So I call my script player controller. So here it's created a class called player controller. And inside that class, you have two functions, one called start and one called update. Right? These up here are a feature in C# called a namespace. So this is a namespace. The Unity engine is a namespace, and namespaces, I have something open here. Namespaces just allow you to organize all your classes, right? So this is how you create a namespace. You'll just type in namespace by the name of the namespace, and then you'll put a whole bunch of classes inside of it, right? And then when you want to use that namespace in a different script, you'll just say using enemy, like that. So all this is systems, right? That's systems.collections is a namespace, collections.generic, that's a namespace. These are the default C# namespaces, and then Unity Engine is the Unity namespace. Right, and inside those namespaces, which are files that we don't see, they have a whole bunch of classes that we're able to use later. So here we've created our own class called player controller, and classes have a whole bunch of functions and a whole bunch of properties. Right, so functions inside a class are usually called methods, but let's just call them a function for now. And I'm going to just create this variable. We'll go into variables in a future video, but I'm just going to call one called strength, right, and set my strength to 5, like that. The two functions that it starts with, one's called start, one's called update. You don't necessarily have to use these, but most of the time you will for some form. And they're usually different versions or different variations of these that we'll get into later. So start will run whenever your script or your character becomes active, and update will run every frame, right? So if that doesn't make sense, just know that start runs once at the start of the object. So you use that for all your initialization. So you'll set all your properties and things like that in there. And then update will run every single frame. So you'll update things in there. Okay. If that makes no sense, don't worry about it. We'll get to it in a bit. Now, one function, and this is in the systems function, is something called print, right? So what print does, so I'm going to just print, and whenever you want to print a whole bunch of characters together, you have to put them inside a inside some double quotation marks or some quotation marks. So hello, like that, and followed by a semicolon. So this here is called a statement, right? And a semicolon is kind of like a full stop, right, for that statement. So when this code has been executed, right, it will read this line of code, and then whenever it sees the semicolon, it'll stop reading, execute, and then go to the next line. So here I'm going to print hello world. And what print does is it allows you to print messages and stuff to what's called the console. So if I save this, right there, and I go to my Unity file, right, and I click here on console, oops, yep, and then I press play on the game. Once it loads, here it says hello world, right? That's because that print just allows you to print to the console. And we'll be using that print function a lot to do some debugging and things like that. Now, if I come back into my script and I move that line to the update and save it, make sure you save this so Unity will compile it in the background. Now when I press play, right, it does it every single frame. So it'll just keep executing whatever's in that update function over and over and over and over again. Okay. So that's a namespace, that's a class, and then we'll be creating our own functions. So namespaces, that's how you create a class, and we'll be creating our own functions. Usually you don't have to create the classes or namespaces for really simple games. You'll just be creating functions within this class itself and then calling them in the start or update loop. And that's it for this video.